I have a couple of quotes that you've published because when you bring up pharmakia and the Rockefellers and the state of allopathic medication and that whole way of treating people for any ailment. We could be talking about the common cold. We can be talking about anything that doesn't have to do with the hearing of voices in the head, where there are some kind of psychotic breaks that are in there. But in this particular situation, whether it's cancer or whether it's a far different story in your situation when you're talking with the criminally insane in these institutions, because we are talking about a malady that is not even of this world, what you start realizing. So it's one thing to say, okay, well, people are sick. They have cancer, they have some other kind of infection, what's going on. And yeah, these drugs, they'll treat symptoms. They're going to keep them alive for a while longer, but they're not going to cure them. And it's a big money making boondoggle. But this right here, what you're starting to stumble upon and realize over time is that it's a much bigger story, because we're talking about something not of this world. Here's what you write. You said there are a number of powerful forces blocking your coming to this conclusion on your own. The first is that we are taught from childhood that all thoughts that appear in our mind belong to us. If you are hearing them, who else could they belong to? Akin to a radio receiver, your brain is a physical receiver of non-physical thought, like a radio is a receiver of non-physical radio waves. If you tore a radio apart, you would never find the person who is speaking through it, which I think is pretty profound. So when you put it that way, it's very clear why such a secular profession would reject this kind of consideration out of hand, because we're dealing, now at that point, you're leading to a place where most psychologists and psychiatrists insist doesn't even exist.
Right. They won't go there. This is a spiritual, energetic malady. It's not a physical malady. It's not something like an infection that you can give an antibiotic for, and the infection will go away. Even though they douse these people with tons of these psychiatric drugs and turn them into zombies, those voices still do not go away for the most part, very seldom. And if they do, then they come back as soon as they stop taking these medications. Not to say these things aren't necessary in many cases. I mean, working with the criminally insane, there's some of those people that were so whacked out, so dangerous, that the only way you could control them is with these psychiatric drugs. You had to tranquilize them. You had to turn them into zombies. Otherwise, they were so dangerous. But for the average person, what psychiatry is telling these people over and over and over again is that your brain is broken. You've got a chemical imbalance in your brain. It's not fixable. The only thing you can do is take these toxic psychiatric drugs for the rest of your life. It's a very hopeless diagnosis. It's like that gate where it says any who enter here give up all hope. And these guys believe it themselves, because that's what they were programmed to believe in medical school.
So what were the biggest things here, though? You say it took over years to really form your thoughts and your convictions on what the issue is and how it needs to be confronted. What were the first, dare I say, paranormal, supernatural events that you said, okay, well, this is not a toxic thought pattern that a person can manifest these kinds of results outside of themselves? Because, what you're describing is a situation where a person is acting as a spiritual conduit. So when did you become completely firm in your beliefs that this is what it is?
Probably 25 years after I started working in this field. I did not want to believe it. For years, I believed it was a chemical imbalance. And then when I saw that it wasn't, when I saw that there was no baseline, that there was no tests, and that psychiatry was just giving those drugs, dishing them out based on what the drug companies were telling them. You know, so that's like letting the fox in the hen house. Um, you know, and then they disproved this chemical imbalance thing over and over and over again. So it was lie after lie, misconception after misconception of psychiatry and psychology also. You know, the second big misconception was the DSM, this listing of all these psychiatric disorders. They're all made up. There's not a single objective test for any of those. What is it, 297 right now in the DSM-5 psychiatric disorders? They make them up. They're all made up. There's not a verifiable test for any of them. So first it was breaking free of all the brainwashing that I underwent in undergraduate and graduate school. You know, okay, this isn't true. This biochemical imbalance thing isn't true. The DSM, these are all made up diagnoses. And then at the state hospital, I was working for the Department of Vocational Rehabilitation. So what we were trying to do was find the highest functioning patients in that hospital, train them up in a vocational skill, and then get them out of there. Okay. And for the most part, probably the highest functioning of the bunch were the schizophrenics. Okay. But they wouldn't stay on their medications. And for good reason. I mean, those medications were horrible. They had all kinds of terrible side effects. And I was wondering, I mean, this brings me back to the first time I noticed this other anomaly. At this hospital, the psychiatric unit I was working on was 3 floors high. So I noticed on the second floor, there was a banister, and it was like a pipe that ran down to the first floor. The cap was off of the top of that banister. It was just a hollow pipe. And I found, well, that's odd. I noticed it, but didn't think anything of it. And then one day I was walking down doing my rounds on the first floor. And here was a maintenance man cutting the top off of the banister on the bottom. So on the first floor, he was cutting the cap off of that banister. And here was sparks flying all over the place, smoke all over the place. And it was like a little 4th of July. So I stopped with all the patients who'd stopped there, and I was standing there with them watching the fireworks. And then when that cap fell off, it was like a waterfall of psychiatric drugs came pouring out of that banister. There were thousands of multicolored pills that just kept pouring out of there like Niagara Falls. These patients had been dumping these psychiatric drugs into that banister for decades.
Jeez.
And there were thousands of them in there now. So I stooped down and I looked at all these different pills, and it looked to me like a majority of them were antipsychotic drugs. So I'm like, each one of these is a vote for a schizophrenic patient to stay crazy. You know, why are they doing that? You know, that back in the 70s, the only treatment they had for schizophrenia was these drugs, right? And that's what we were taught in school. That's what we were taught on the front lines. It was all drugs. It was all run by psychiatry. They were like the captains of this stuff. And then I found out that my patients, they would not stay on these drugs.